Environmental justice from a footnote to a headline. I've been doing this a long time. My job is to connect the dots this morning, and I'm pretty good at it. No brag. I've written 18 books over the last 40 years. Housing, transportation, energy, disaster, health, land use. It's 18 books, but it's just one book, but don't tell anybody. The connective tissue in all those books: fairness, justice, equity. We're talking about fair housing, just transportation, health equity, etc. Having the facts has never been enough. You have facts, data, science. It's not enough. We must marry facts, data, science with action. Period. Full stop. Our movement has redefined what environment is, and environmentalism. The environment is everything, where we live, work, play, worship, learn, as well as the physical and natural world. The environment is out there, and it's also in this room. So when we talk about changing the paradigm to be protective of the environment and protective of health, we're talking about basic rights. Environmental justice embraces the principle that all people and communities are entitled to equal protection of our environmental, energy, health, employment, education, housing, transportation, and civil rights laws. When we fail to protect the most vulnerable populations, for example, children, we place everyone at risk. It's like saying when we don't protect the weakest levee in New Orleans, when Katrina comes and the wind comes and the levee and the water comes and the levee breaches, it's not just the lower ninth that's going to be impacted, it's the entire city. So we must build our standards and build our models of protection to be the most protective of children. America is segregated, and so is pollution. Let me say that again. America is segregated, and so is pollution. It was 1979. Let me back up 11 years before that. 1968, April 4th, Dr. King was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee, over what? Garbage, landfills, basic rights, equal pay, equal treatment. Sanitary workers in Memphis, Tennessee went on strike because of work conditions and because of the physical nature in which workers were not given the same rights as others. These are black sanitary workers. Dr. King was killed, and on April 4th, 7 days later, President Johnson signed on April 11th, 1968, the Fair Housing Act. So how do you go from garbage to fair housing? Well, there's an easy connect. The things that connects the two is called structural institutional racism. So in 1979, I was asked to conduct a study, and I was at Texas Southern University, where I am now, and my wife came home one day, who's a lawyer, and said, "Bob, I've just sued the state of Texas." I said, "Baby, you just sued my employer, because I was working at a state university, 3 years out of graduate school, untenured." Did you hear I said untenured? And she said, I need someone who can find where all the landfills are and incinerators are and garbage dumps are, and put it on a map and tell who lives around there, because I've just sued this company. I won't call any names, but you can see the initials. Second largest waste disposal company in the country at the time, And she said, I have to go to federal court in 10 days. I said, you need a sociologist. She said, that's what you are, right? This is true. And I said, yeah, but. She said, no, but. She said, I need you to do this. And this is not what I was trained to do. I was a sociologist and working mostly with data, demography, sub-area in sociology, maps, housing, residential patterns. From Iowa State University, where I got my PhD in 1976, and we're in Houston in 1979. So I had 10 students in my research methods class, and I told my students, we got a research project. It's a research method. And when your professor tells you, you got a research project, what you got? A research project. So now this is 1979. The case was Bean versus Southwestern Waste Management Corporation, the first lawsuit in the United States challenging environmental racism using civil rights law. And what I did is I developed a research protocol, old maps, data from archives, library, old newspaper from microfiche. Yes, microfiche is in the museum now. Young people, I know you don't know what I'm talking about. Google it. And windshield surveys, meaning you go out, take my list, and go out and see if there's any artifacts. It's called multi-methods approach. We didn't call it anything then, but do it. And I say if you see a mountain in Houston, because Houston is flat, be suspicious. Landfill. So what we were able to find, let me back up. Assault by any name is assault. Now, this landfill was called Whispering Pines. Sounds like a subdivision. I would love to live in Whispering Pines. But no, it's a landfill. Now, the gentleman that's with the bullhorn out there with the demonstrators, this is 1979, I took his photograph, and this is Al Green. No, not the singer. But this gentleman was a young justice of the peace out there demonstrating with the residents. He's a congressman from Houston, Texas, Congressman Al Green. You probably heard that name. What we found is that 5 out of 5 of the city-owned landfills, 6 out of the city-owned incinerators, 3 out of 4 of the private-owned landfills from the 30s up to 1978 were located in predominantly black neighborhoods. 82% of all the garbage disposed in Houston during that period of time was dumped in black neighborhoods, even though blacks made up only 25% of the population. Now, as a sociologist, you seldom get data like that is so rich. But at the same time, we went to federal court in 1985, and the judge was calling us niggers. You niggers, be quiet. Now, if you're not from the South, you don't know what I'm talking about. But nigger is nothing more than a dressed up N-word. So he was calling us the N-word, dressed up. But we lost in court. In 1985, we lost in appeal. But you have to know when you win. These were data that were irrefutable. You don't get data like that. 82% or something located in an area that's where you get 25%. There was no movement in 1979. The movement was born in Warren County in 1982 over a landfill again. Not garbage, but toxic waste. Toxic waste was dumped along the highways, and they needed a place to put it, and they went through this elaborate scientific process of selecting. And that's ended up selecting one of the poorest counties and one of the blackest counties in the state. No science, I'm sorry. The only science is called political science. 1990, I expanded the Houston study to look at the South, to see the South different. And it's different. There's something unique about the Southern United States. Jim Crow, slavery, resistance to segregation, resistance to not only civil rights, but environmental rights. When I looked at dumping in Dixie, I isolated what was going on. America is segregated, and so is pollution. In the South, pollution tracks with race as the most potent factor. It was 1994 that our movement reached the White House. We had a meeting, a health symposium, Environmental Justice Health Symposium in 1994 in Arlington. And on the second day of that conference, NIEHS conference, a few of us were called to the White House to say we got something to announce. We went over there and it was the signing of the executive order. I've been to two. This is 1994. I'm standing next to Carol Brown in the blue jacket. That's me. That's the Oval Office in February. And I must say, nice office. If we talk about zip code, for example, where you live can impact your health. And zip code is still one of the most potent factors, determining factors in terms of health safety. Where you live can impact your health. This is zip code map. Darker the brown representing economically depressed. The blue zip codes represent prosperity. Look at the preponderance of brown. If you draw a line across the U.S., horizontal, and how much blue is in the upper half versus the lower half. Look at life expectancy. You tell me your zip code and what's in that zip code, we can almost predict the life expectancy. Now, race matters and place matters. In the United States, all communities are not created equal. Environmental threats track closely with historical racial redlining. And that's been discussed yesterday and a number of topics. Redlining tracks closely with dumping, pollution sacrifice zone, nature-deprived areas, heat islands, flood zones, food deserts, energy insecurity hotspots, and those who are left behind and left out by FEMA. Pollution redlining, for example. Communities that are redlined are more prone to have all kinds of industrial facilities, and oftentimes our communities of color, are zoned as compatible with poison. It's not that we select a poison pill, it's that these pills are given to us, and oftentimes we have not had the political power or the rights to resist. Segregated housing, air pollution. Residents in racially segregated communities breathe in air 3 times more concentrated with toxins than others that are not segregated. In some cases, if we're talking about metals, it's not 3 times, it's 10 times. Air pollution exposure and disparity in public housing. Public housing residents, who are talking about disabled, low income, and families with children who live in public housing, are more likely to be exposed to dangerous pollutants. In this case, we're talking on this map, PM 2.5. People of color are exposed to more pollution and from multiple sources, and that people of color are more likely to breathe pollution that's created by others. And so when we talk about this justice and fairness and equity, we're talking about some communities not having the right, the wrong complexion for protection. And our children are the ones that are at greatest risk. And we say, no, kids can't vote, kids can't demonstrate, so that means that we must protect them. We also discover and know that it's not just about pollution and health, but it's also pollution, health and asthma and other, but with COVID, discoveries. But our community said, oh, that's a great Harvard study, but we could have told them that. If COVID is about a respiratory compromise, then we're already compromised before COVID. Because it's hard as hell to breathe in this community where you're surrounded by 15 polluting facilities. Getting off dirty power makes for good sense. When we clean up the air, we save more lives. Getting off a dirty coal. Plant closures of coal plants, fewer emergency room visits. Closing the dirty power plants, we have fewer premature births. It's not just a poverty thing. Some people want to say, well, it's just poor people getting poisoned. No. Middle-income African Americans are more likely to live in, who make $50,000 to $60,000, live in neighborhoods that are more polluted than whites who make $10,000. How can that be? Residential segregation, housing discrimination, and historic redlining. Our most vulnerable populations live on the fence line with pollution. No, this is not trick photography. This is in Houston, Texas. There's no buffer. There are trees, but pollution is getting through to communities. If we look at where the refineries are, I mean, there's 140 of them in 32 states. Half of the people that are at risk from pollution that causes cancer are people of color who are living in that hotspot. Redlining has created a pattern in terms of oil and gas well refineries and pumping. Yes, we have oil refining in cities. We have these pump wells in cities. And the areas that are most likely to have those areas, people of color. You have more wells, you have more flares, you will have pollution. Tracking with race and racial redlining. Risky and unproven technologies are still coming our way. We have not had a National Academy of Sciences, engineering, medicine study on the safety, health and safety of carbon capture storage. But these things are coming to our way. $6 billion being pushed out by DOE, talking about we're going to create these CCS hubs, hydrogen hubs. We don't know if hydrogen hubs are safe. They're coming to the same places that historically have borne the burden. LNG export terminals, same pattern, pushing out gas to export abroad, and the export terminals, look where they're concentrated. Look at the map. You don't need to be a geographer to understand the pattern. Segregated and stranded from nature. 74% of people of color live in what's called nature-deprived areas, compared to 23% of whites. Well, what is nature-deprived? Fancy way of saying, we ain't got no trees, no green canopy, no parks, it's barren. Now, we know the health benefits of having nature. Rich Americans already enjoy 50% more greenery in their environment compared to low-income communities. Not rocket science. Low-income communities are more likely to have fewer trees. It's actually more likely to be hotter. Climate change will exacerbate all the inequities that I've just explained. My NYU Press Wrong Complexion for Protection book came out in second edition paperback last year in December. But we asked the question, will the government response to climate change be fair? It was not a rhetorical question, and we did 300 pages and came up with the answer in 2 words. Will the government response to climate change be fair? Short answer, hell no. Unless we make it fair. Climate change will impact every region of the United States. You look at this map, you can see it's happening all over the map. Breaking out. Heat waves, tornadoes, sea level rise, all kinds of calamities. Climate vulnerability index, no mystery in terms of which region of the country is most vulnerable. The South. Which region of the country paying the greatest price when it comes to climate? Studies done in UC Berkeley that if we do nothing or little, the country could stand to lose 1.2% drop in GDP. But the South, by the end of the century, could lose 20%. The poorest region of the country and the most vulnerable could lose the most. Disasters widen the racial wealth gap. Here's a study that was done by Rice University and Pitt, found that after these $10 billion severe weather events, and after the money goes in to fix and retrofit and to make those communities whole, white communities end up, after money goes in, federal funds, $126,000 better off in wealth. In other words, that wealth increase. Whereas people of color end up losing $29,000. Wealth transfer. FEMA, who gets left behind? FEMA's own study saying that people of color and poor people are getting left behind. Managed retreat is nothing more than a fancy word saying who's going to get bought out and who can leave. Well, again, you find that disaster buyouts favor whites, protecting the most vulnerable people and vulnerable places. This is a justice issue. Theft of redlining and flooding, our communities of color are more likely to be prone to flooding over these years because of lack of infrastructure. Going forward in the next 30 years, flooding is going to be worse in communities that have a larger percentage of people of color. Why? Because of the infrastructure, lack of resources. That means implications for flood insurance. You look at the states that's having the highest increase in flood insurance, it's in those southern states, Gulf Coast states. Climate change will make it hotter, and that heat is the #1 killer. And if we talk about this whole question of heat vulnerability, again, heat stress disproportionately impact people of color. Redlining has left neighborhoods hotter. No trees, no green canopy, no parks, green space. It's hotter. And when people say, damn, it's hot as hell out here, literally they are saying, that's what the science is saying. This is true in almost every major city in the country in terms of which communities are hotter. When you go behind heat and pollution, you're talking about bad pregnancy outcomes. Our neighborhoods are hotter and there's more pollution. And when you talk about who's impacted the most, black women and their babies. When we talk about too hot to work outside, we know who have those jobs. And we know it's not just an environmental issue, it's an economic issue. If you don't work, you don't get paid if you work outside. Too hot to go to school and learn, we know that our infrastructure for schools in many of our neighborhoods don't have the right kind of AC in terms of heating and cooling and the infrastructure. We learned that during COVID. Our school was not prepared to deal with some of the things that were needed. So our kids are at triple jeopardy when it comes to heat waves and wildfires and droughts. Ensuring that we follow needs rather than the money following money. We have to make sure that the Justice 40 initiative that the private administration has in place, and I serve on the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council, and we are adamant about making sure that those resources reach the right population. The Inflation Reduction Act, $369 billion, and there's lots of monies. The challenge is to ensure that those resources get to the right places that have been left out, left behind, ignored too long. We can't have folks creating these, I was going to say artificial organization, they parachute in, they look good, write good proposal, and they get the money. We say no to that. When we talk about President Biden signing the executive order on environmental justice, 14097, he signed it day before Earth Day, and it wasn't in the Oval Office, this was in the Rose Garden, and looked like the gentleman behind President looked like he got kind of excited. But anyway, I believe that we can make this right. We can do justice when we connect those dots. We get organizations, groups, individuals working across disciplines, working together with justice, fairness, and equity at the center. Thank you very much.